Well, good morning and welcome everyone to Roslyn Hill Chapel, a spiritual home for open minds. I'm Rev Kate Dean and I am proud to serve as the minister for this Unitarian spiritual community in Hampstead in North London. Whoever you are and however you are this morning, let us take time to reconnect with ourselves, with each other, and with that which we hold to be of highest worth. Our theme for this month is story, and we will be exploring this in a variety of ways, including an all-ages service next week. This morning, we'll consider how we learn from stories, both fictional and factual. Today, I'm delighted to welcome some of our stewards into the chapel building as we prepare to open for public services in June. And if you'd like to join us next month, please do look out for information in our weekly notices email. The services will need to be booked in advance while COVID restrictions are still in place, and we hope to open bookings via our new website when it's launched at the end of this month. Please do join us for tea and conversation in the virtual side aisle at midday. The Zoom link for this was in our weekly update email, or alternatively, if you're watching via our YouTube stream, you should find the Connect link in the YouTube description. And you can sign up for our weekly emails via our current website for more information about all of our activities. We are an independent registered charity and we do rely on your contributions to continue our work. We encourage you to donate directly via our Just Giving page or using the donate button on our website. We also have facilities for cash donations within the chapel building if you prefer. And thank you to all of you for the many different ways that you contribute to our spiritual community. Now let us take some time to gather our spirits for worship with the prelude music. We light our chalice this morning, the symbol of our liberal religious faith, with words by Reverend Scott Taylor. We gather as a house of stories. As we learn of those who have gone before, the way in front of us becomes more clear. As we weave together the tales of who we are, our loneliness lessens, and the web of our oneness is revealed. As we listen deeply in those times of tender trust, we descend into the longings and learnings, hopes and fears of the humanity that we share. Beneath the wells from which we drink, there is a deeper well that feeds them all. Come, let us tell each other tales of our thirst. Let us drink from the stories that sustain us all. Today I also light a candle of sorrow, especially for those major conflicts in the world and all those who are suffering. And as is our tradition, we gather our thoughts and look into our hearts for the joys and the concerns that we may find there. And on all of your behalves, I will light some candles for our joys and concerns. May those joys and concerns in our hearts be held within a web of love as we gather together this morning. Blessed be. I'd like to share with you a story from the Jewish tradition. I've heard this story, a number of versions of this story over the years, most recently in the form of a bedtime story, A Squash and a Squeeze by the wonderful Julia Donaldson. Although I'm pretty sure I could recite it by heart by now, I'm actually going to tell you a version that's a little closer to the original. So long ago, there was a poor man, and he lived in a very small house with his wife and his 6 children. The house was so loud and so crowded, it was really making the whole family unhappy. So eventually he went to his rabbi, his teacher, to ask for some advice. And his rabbi listened patiently to his story and all of his complaints and his woes, and then asked him, "How many animals do you have?" Well, he thought that was a bit of an odd question, considering he was talking about his house, but he said, "Well, I've got some chickens, and I've got a goat, and I've also got a cow." And the rabbi said, "What I want you to do is bring 6 chickens into your house to live with you." Well, it seemed strange, but the rabbi was a wise man, so the man said, "Yes, I'll do as you say." And he went home and he brought the 6 chickens into his house. A week later, he went back to the rabbi and said, "Rabbi, this is impossible. There are 6 chickens and my family, and the chickens are pecking all over the ground and, well, pooping everywhere, and it's just horrible." And the rabbi listened patiently and he said, "Well, what I want you to do now is to bring your goat to live in your house with you." Well, the man thought about this and accepted it. He went home and he pulled his goat into his house. The next week, he came back to the rabbi and said, "Oh, we've had such a terrible week. There are the chickens there, I've told you about them already, and then the goat has started eating the furniture. He's pulling the things off the chairs, he's nibbling on the table legs. It's a nightmare." And the rabbi listened patiently and said, "Well, what I'd like you to do now is bring your cow in to the house to live with you." Well, this seemed like a step too far, but the man accepted, and he went back home and he pulled his cow into the house. But of course, a week later, he went back to the rabbi and said, "This is beyond impossible. It's really so getting on all of our nerves now. The cow's rampaging around, chasing after the goat. The chickens are flying all over the place. We can't live like this." And the rabbi listened patiently and said, "Well, now what I want you to do is take all of your animals and put them back into the paddock." And so the man went home, he took all the animals out, the family helped to clean and tidy up the house, and a week later he went back to the rabbi, and this time he was hopping and skipping, he was virtually dancing to the rabbi's house. He said, Rabbi, thank you so much for your advice. All of the animals are out, our house is clean and tidy, and it feels like it's the biggest palace ever. Thank you so much. You are such a wise man." And that is the story of the rabbi's wisdom. Now, we're still not allowed to sing within the chapel building, but we thought we would choose and include a hymn for you at home, and we enjoy this tune in any case. We're going to enjoy "How Can I Keep From Singing," an early Quaker hymn, and the lyrics should be in the YouTube description if you'd like to sing along at home. How can I keep from singing? Our reading this morning is called Telling, and it's written by Laura Hershey. What you risk telling your story, you will bore them. Your voice will break, your ink spill and stain your coat. No one will understand. Their eyes become fences. You will park yourself forever on the outside. Your differentness, once and for all revealed, dangerous. The names you give to yourself will become epithets. Your happiness will be called bravery, denial. Your sadness will justify their pity. Your fear will magnify their fears. Everything you say will prove something about their God or their economic system. Your feelings, that change day to day, kaleidoscopic, will freeze in place, brand you forever, justify anything they decide to do with you. Those with power can afford to tell their story or not. Those without power risk everything to tell their story and must. Someone somewhere will hear your story and decide to fight, to live, and refuse compromise. Someone else will tell her own story, risking everything. Let us gather now in prayer and pray a prayer for all. Spirit of life and love, God of our hearts, as we seek connection with someone, something beyond ourselves, we remain humbled by the awesome complexity of the universe, the miracle of creation, and the grace of the ultimate Spirit. In this time of prayer, let us give thanks for our community and our many gifts by naming our blessings quietly to ourselves in these moments of stillness. Recognizing our woes and faults, let us sit quietly with those parts of ourselves which cause us discomfort, with a spirit of gentle understanding and forgiveness. Spirit of the divine self, we open up our hearts to listen to the wisdom of the still, small voice that may speak in these quiet moments. God of our hearts, let this small act of worship send a ripple of loving kindness from this place to our loved ones, our acquaintances, and the wider world. O God, may we become the embodiment of divine love. Blessed be, and Amen. When I first came to Unitarian services, I am not embarrassed to admit that I learnt most from the children's story, or certainly its message was the one that stayed with me throughout the week. And with our new shorter services and separate children's chapel sessions, I sometimes wonder if people have been missing the time for all ages in our services, which is one reason why I chose to share that Jewish parable today. Stories help us to learn, not only made-up stories, but the stories that we share about ourselves. Familiar stories from childhood can give us a warm glow. Wisdom stories from different traditions can teach us more than the most eloquent lecture. But it is the stories we tell about ourselves that help us to go deeper with each other and make sense of the world. A group of us has been meeting on Tuesday evenings to work through the spirituality course, The Listening Path by Julia Cameron. For 6 weeks, we are learning to listen more deeply to our environment, to each other, and to that which lies beyond. In doing so, we are also learning a whole lot more about our fellow companions along the listening path, and of course about ourselves. In The Sacred Art of Listening, Kay Lindahl writes, "Perhaps one of the most precious and powerful gifts we can give another person is to really listen to them, to listen with quiet, fascinated attention, with our whole being fully present." One of the consequences of being apart from each other for so long has been the lack of opportunity to listen and connect in a casual and spontaneous way. But in groups like ours on Tuesday nights, we find we can have a surprising depth of conversation. It's really about taking the time to let those interactions happen. In The Listening Path, Julia Cameron quotes her novelist friend John Bowers, who reflects, "When I hijack the conversation, I am only saying what I already know. When I listen, I learn something that I don't already know. Learn to listen, and then listen to learn." Now, travel may broaden the mind, but travelling into the stories of each other's lives can be just as meaningful. We discover that we don't all think alike. We can't assume that someone else will make the same decisions as us. We all have unique perspectives built up over time and based on our backgrounds and our experiences. Only you can really be you. But we also discover a surprising amount of common ground, and this is how really great relationships can develop. Years ago, when I was attending evening classes regularly, I was fascinated to observe in myself the transition from stranger to friend as we gradually got to know each other. And now, whenever I'm in a new group, I relish the opportunity to get to know others more deeply as the weeks progress. I enjoy the process of transformation, the transition that begins with only a few clues to what that person is really like, what they look like, perhaps, what their name is, which eventually expands to form a fully formed three-dimensional individual. And in my imagination, in my mind's eye, they start as these flat, cut-out 2D images, 2D characters, and they gradually inflate over the weeks and become fully formed, rounded human beings. This comes when we learn to listen to each other, and we find that we can learn from our listening. As Mark Nepo writes, "To listen is to continually give up all expectation and to give our attention completely and freshly to what is before us, not really knowing what we will hear or what that will mean. In the practice of our days, to listen is to lean in softly, with a willingness to be changed by what we hear. Stories can energize and enrich our lives. What we learn through stories are the lessons of each other's mistakes, as well as each other's successes. And of course, a story is often much easier to remember than a set of dry facts. Stories then inspire, connect, and educate us. G.K. Chesterton once wrote, "Fairy tales are more than true, not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten." I love the parable of the wise rabbi because it teaches us the lesson in such an entertaining way. Sometimes we need to experience the loss of our current circumstances to really fully appreciate them. Stories are an essential part of our human experience. We are storytelling creatures from our earliest years. We have a natural tendency to think and speak in stories, using anecdote to illustrate a point or reminiscences to build intimacy. When we listen to a story, it gives us a chance to use our unique imaginations to create a world of the story for ourselves. And I think this is why we are so often disappointed when we watch the film adaptation of a favourite novel. It's because inside our minds we've already made the most perfect film suited to our personal taste back when we read the book in the first place. And while discussion and debate often stay at the logical level of the mind, the realm of story reaches beyond that to appeal to the heart as well. In another recent group, reading through the anti-racism book Me and White Supremacy by Layla Said, I was struck by how often a personal story, a lived experience, had the capacity to touch the heart and change views compared to a lofty theoretical argument. As Laura Hershey says in our reading earlier, those with power can afford to tell their story or not. Those without power risk everything to tell their story and must. Someone, somewhere, will hear your story and decide to fight, to live, to refuse compromise. Someone else will tell her own story, risking everything. The Buddhist activist David Loy writes, "We do not experience a world and afterwards make up stories to understand it. Stories teach us what is real, what is true, and what is possible. They are not abstractions from life, though they can be that. They are necessary for our engagement with life." Stories are with us for our whole lives, from the fairy tales of childhood, the Bible stories perhaps of school days, to the poetry we enjoy as adults and the stories we weave every day through the sheer nature of our existence. And so I thank you for joining me, and I hope we can enjoy more stories, tea and conversation in the virtual side aisle at midday. But let us gather now for our closing blessing. Spirit of life and love, may we honour our stories and those of others, so that we can learn from them as we continue on our own journey to be our best selves. Blessed be, and Amen.